hypothesis. The formation of planets in solar systems on hot orbits of stars. In my hypothesis, the full period of planets in the solar system is described in the interval from 4.55 billion years ago to our time. The script for the formation of planets in solar systems may be similar. Therefore, in this publication, the events of the formation of planets will be described on the example of our solar system. The Sun can form itself in its hot orbit of the planet, and then, in cycles, on average, after 450 million years, these planets are separated from the Sun, and due to the expansion of the universe, move towards their distant boundaries. This also applies to large planets, which also, in order to maintain the stability of their planetary rotation, due to their increasing mass, are forced to form the Moon on their close orbits. The reasons affecting the cyclicity of the formation of planets are in hot orbits of stars. Important. The cyclicity of the formation of their planets in solar systems is affected by the critical mass of the substance that forms on their hot orbits. If, in the next cyclic period, in the hot orbit of the Sun, the necessary critical mass of the substance from which the planet is formed, then the next period, the formation of the planets, may be increased, will not be increased. And vice versa, if in the next cyclic period in the hot orbit of the Sun, the critical mass of the substance from which the planets are formed will be typed earlier, their next cyclic period, then planets can form ahead of time. Therefore, 450 million years is a conditional, approximate designation, cyclicality of the formation of planets on hot orbits of stars. In the future, this will affect the non-ordiness of the distance of the planets between neighboring planets located in solar systems. The Sun has its own sunny orbit that I called the hot orbit Sun. Hot orbit implies that we are talking about the closest orbit, namely to the Sun, on which the planets of the solar system are born. The process itself. The formation of planets in hot orbit of the Sun. First, in the orbit of the Sun, a ring forms from different particles and cosmic dust rotating in this hot orbit. After the next time, approximately after 450 million years, and the accumulation of a critical mass of substances in the orbit of the Sun, these rotating particles, which will become so much that they will face each other, and due to high temperature, these colliding particles will begin to stick together, first forming small bodies, which then will also stick together and form in the hot orbit of the Sun, the largest body, which will later become a planet. This is almost this on large planets that form on their close orbits rings from rotating particles, and after time, after the accumulation of a critical mass from these particles rotating in the orbit of the planet, the Moon forms. Subsequently, these ranges that appear will stabilize the rotation of these large planets. Why are all planets in the solar system, then, so different in mass and composition? There are planets with solid Earth's crust, but there are such planets that do not have a firm shell. Therefore, these planets are forced to become gas giants. My important assumption: without, at the time of formation, in the hot orbit of the Sun, dense and solid particles. Planets, forced to be born, without their dense shell. Perhaps, with the initial formation of the planets in the hot orbit of the Sun, fragments supplied by comets, which mainly had a gas component, prevailed and rotated. Therefore, in the orbit of the Sun, gas planets were formed that did not have a solid, dense shell, which over time, were forced to expand and become gas giants. And all because when the planets are formed, in a hot orbit of the Sun there were no sufficiently solid and dense particles that have a rocky base that could form dense shells on the planets. At the initial moment of its violent reproductive activity, the Sun, a young yellow dwarf, who only turned 0.95 billion years, in his hot orbit forms his first planet, Neptune. It happened 4.55 billion years ago. Neptune, mainly consisting of loose particles, unable to form a firm planetary shell, moving away from the Sun, began to expand, becoming a gas giant. Further, after 450 million years, this happened 4.1 billion years ago. The Sun, which has already turned 1.4 billion years, due to the accumulated and rotating in its hot orbit of a cosmic material consisting of dust, stones filled with various gases, again forms, now the second planet, which was given the name Uranus. Also, not having insufficiently solid particles of the Sun rotating in the hot orbit of the Sun, unable to form a firm planetary shell, at the time of the origin of the planet, this planet, moving away from the Sun, also began to expand, becoming a gas giant. After 450 million years, this happened 3.65 billion years ago. Everything is repeated again. The Sun, which is then turned 1.85 billion years, forms again, in its hot, close orbit, the third planet Saturn. Here, as well as in the first two cases, not having dense particles in hot orbit having a solid stony base, a planet that does not have a dense planetary shell appears. This planet, at a distance from the Sun, began to expand, becoming a gas giant, just like the two previous planets formed earlier in the orbit of the Sun. Further, again, after 450 million years, this happened 3.2 billion years ago. The Sun, then turned 2.3 billion years, forms a gas giant in its hot orbit, the Jupiter planet, which, moving away from the Sun due to the violent frequent activity of comets, began to grow to unprecedented sizes, attracting to his body, possessing a large mass, everything that flew next to him. From this moment, they began to occur in the solar system, all future changes. The giant body of Jupiter began to intercept part of the comets, which should fly directly to the Sun, feeding it with gas and ice, turning into hydrogen, but never flew. You probably think this is only Jupiter to blame for all the bad changes that fell on the solar system. No, this is not so. the planet Neptune, also expanding and rotating in its own solar orbit, possessing magnetism, began to tear off the asteroids from its places in a state of relative peace, in the Kuiper belt, which began to break away from their places and rush, first behind Neptune, and then began to move towards the Sun, experiencing its strong attraction. Asteroids, consisting of dense, solid parts having a rocky base, steel, flying to the Sun, burning, to leave a part of their external, heavy cargo in the hot orbit of the Sun. After 450 million years, this happened 2.75 billion years ago. The Sun, which turned 2.75 billion years, in its hot orbit, again, forms a planet from fragments that rotated in its hot orbit. The composition of these fragments also included now, and other, more dense components. These fragments, also consisting of rocky elements that are warming up in the hot orbit of the Sun, have now formed a planet of a different type, namely, a planet that is a hard shell, which, due to the expansion of the universe, began to separate from the Sun, and slowly move, following the expanding universe. That's why gravity, compressing more solid elements to a greater extent, began to hold the internal gases inside the planet. The planet, having a dense shell, the Earth's crust, moving away from the Sun, did not allow the gases located in the body of this planet to go outside, and at the same time, these hot gases continued to warm up this planet, from the inside. The planet that appeared, with a dense earthly crust, this planet Phaethon, vice, on which, then collapse, the most terrible, cosmic misfortunes. A comet will crash in this planet. It will happen 2.5 billion years ago. The planet Phaethon, without magnetic gravitational stability, will fall apart into small fragments, asteroids, which will remain to rotate around the solar orbit in their cyclic place in the asteroid belt. This comet had to pull him to himself, Jupiter, but he, at that moment, was not yet as huge as he had now become, in our time, and he was at that unfortunate moment in the far orbit, so the comet, breaking into the solar system, rushed straight to the planet Phaethon. And so, as this planet did not have sufficient magnetic gravitational stability because of its not large, at that time the mass, because the Sun, blinded this planet, from what was. Therefore, the planet Phaethon, after the comet crashed into it, simply fell apart into small fragments, having lost its stability due to a powerful thermonuclear explosion, the detonator of which was the ice in the comet. This ice, when hit, turned into hydrogen. And if it were not for a combination of circumstances where the main conductor of all changes was the Jupiter giant, then the Phaethon planet would be the same gas giant as his brothers of the planets that appeared before, only the fifth in a row. And the comet bursting into the solar system, I could not then destroy the planet Phaethon that has a giant mass and greater gravitational stability at that time. What happened next? In a new, cyclic period after 450 million years, this happened 2.3 billion years ago. The Sun, having the age of 3.2 billion years, taught by bitter experience, not to form very small planets, which does not leave hope to give birth to at least someone, forms a different planet in its hot orbit, again with a dense shell mass similar to the planet Phaethon, only a little larger in mass. Still, after 450 million years, this happened 1.85 billion years ago. The Sun then turned 3.65 billion years. Now, it has taught its previous mistakes. It forms a planet in its hot orbit, a girl in the blue dress Earth. Reasonable people can already trace and see the desire to create an ideal world, a planet on which the creatures of the earthly, material species, the passing stages of evolutionary development can live and develop. The need for the formation of giant planets disappeared, because it was rather initial, unsuccessful attempts to create a planet of an ideal type. Further, after 450 million years, this happened 1.4 billion years ago. The Sun, which has already turned 4.1 billion years old. In its hot orbit, the second planet Venus, in the hope that it will look like her older sister Earth, and go in her footsteps. Further, after 450 million years, this happened 0.95 billion years ago. The Sun, which is 4.55 billion years old, forms at such an advanced age in his hot orbit another planet, a little boy whom people dubbed and named Mercury. If we take into account what we talked about before, in this publication, then here, you can see the lack of construction resources in the formation of the planet Mercury in the hot orbit of the Sun. The planet turned out to be small. This is a big minus. A small planet, as we already know, is unstable in gravitational retention. Here, one has to rely only on the fact that cavalcade, consisting of planets, gas giants, will protect a small planet from asteroids and comets in the future, when this planet will depart from the Sun. The planet Mercury, on the example of its existence, should already make it clear to all doubting reasonable people, at least I hope so, that the whole planets of the solar system formed the Sun. Yes, it was tired, but it didn't calculate with the necessary resources. But the Sun no longer has a desire to form gas giants, and this is the right direction of movement. After 450 million years, this will happen in a nearby cosmic standards of the future. The Sun will turn at that time 5 billion years, which will be already at overripe age, will begin to form a girl planet in its hot orbit, which will have the name Sun. I would really like to see what the Sun will succeed. Comets. These are cargo carriers from other solar systems. They can carry in their body, in addition to ice that helps the Sun to replenish hydrogen reserves, also other various gases, clogged into stone fragments. The predominance of gases, at the time of the formation of the planets, in the hot orbit of the Sun, contributes, subsequently, the emergence of gas giants. This is my important assumption. Also, Comets can carry on themselves, and transport fragments that have a solid, stony base. Flying up to the Sun, these comets lose part of their body-containing gas, as well as their dense elements, which, not reaching the Sun, begin to settle and rotate in its hot orbit over time, forming cosmic bodies that will have either gas or gas-dense shell. From the author: I believe that the planets in the Solar System were not formed simultaneously, and even more so, not at once, but cyclically, one after another, at intervals, about 450 million years. From the story, in the retelling of what is happening, which has survived to this day, in the past, the vice planet really existed. Phaethon is the fictitious name of this planet, which, as I believe, in the past, a comet, flying to the Sun, collided. And yet, as is already known, the first people appeared on the planet Earth 7 million years ago, when this planet went to solar orbit, to the zone of inhabited, with favorable conditions for the life of living creatures on the planet. This zone of habitability, with favorable conditions for living creatures necessary for the life of living creatures, at one time, could pass all the planets of the Solar System. Only for gas giants this zone at the optimal temperatures did not matter, because the material life is born on these planets filled with gas, could not. Therefore, such a current situation in the Solar System made it possible to form planets with a firm shell, and this, in turn, served the formation of material life on planets in the Solar System with the advent of the Phaethon planet. And yet, the most important thing, we now do not just talk about the planets that exist, we can already analyze good luck and failures in the formation of the planets, see the desire of unknown forces, create a planet with the most ideal living conditions, which means that now, we can solve more serious problems. What is happening in the universe is, first of all, a mathematics, which disposes of cyclicality, repeated in advance programmable processes that occur both on the stars and in the whole universe. Only in reality, real events can affect these flowing processes, and therefore, their adjustments can be made into the preceding processes taking place in cycles. Anatoly Semenov-Dorian, September 24, 2023.